Hey guys, it's Alex. How's it going? We are going to talk about, well, first, this is going to be a Steel Talk Sunday. Working title, of course. And we're going to talk about 1095. So, the basics of steel is, I mentioned in my other video, I said iron ore. It's not iron ore. Obviously, you mine the iron ore, and then you need to extract it from, the ore. So, they crush it up, they refine it, melt it down, and do a lot of refining until we get just pure iron. And then the magic happens is when they add the carbon. So carbon is a alloying addition, and the term steel is basically just iron and carbon. That's it. And when we get into the 10xx steels, we start to work with our ratios or our percentages of how much carbon is added. So if you have a 1095 steel, it's 1.0% to 90.95% carbon. 1095. Just think of it as like the 10 has a decimal place in it, and then you do like a slash or dash 0.95. So that's always going to be the case with 1095, and then you have your 1080s and your 1075s and all that shit. So you go down from there. So when I said alloying additions, there are other alloying additions, added to 1095. Number one is carbon. And mainly what carbon is for. So the more carbon you have, the more strength and the more hardness you can get. So think about it like if you take, a high carbon steel, which is 1095, and then you also take another high carbon, I guess. I don't want to get into stainlesses, but ZDP 189 is an okay example of where we get a lot of carbon and we can get obtain a high hardness. So just think of more carbon, more hardness, and more strength. And I'm not sure of like the ductile strength or definitely not edge retention, because we need to add other alloying additions to get that edge retention. But strength, as far as like, I hate to say the Sharpie, V testing or whatever, because that has nothing to do with knives. Like, I hate when people fucking bring that up, because it nothing to do with knives. That has to do with a fucking hunk of metal. Like a hunk of metal that's thick, and they smash it, and then that gives you your whatever, how deep your notch goes or whatever. So it's nothing to do with knives. You're not going to do a Sharpie test on a fucking knife. That's ignorant. So, what other alloying elements are there? We have carbon, we already talked about. More carbon, more strength, more hardness. And then we have manganese, Mn, on the periodic table. That is that increases hardenability. So what is hardenability? Hardenability is it's the how hard within or how far it can penetrate into the steel. So if you have a steel with low hardenability, the hardness isn't going to penetrate as far into the steel. And if you have a high hardenability, it's going to penetrate further into the steel. So if you had, what do I got? So let's take this. If this is high hardenability, it's going to penetrate all the way through to the center of this platen here, and the whole thing is going to be obtain that hardenability or hardness. Hardness isn't hardenability, but You get the picture. So that element helps with that, and it also helps with solid solution strengthening. We can get into that later. Don't really need to talk about it right now. We have phosphorus, which is actually an impurity of the steel, and that is kind of manipulated and used as a solid solution strengthener, along with manganese. Oh, yeah. So yeah, if you see phosphorus in a steel, it's not supposed to be there. It's just there, part of the steel making process. And then we have sulfur, which is another impurity that actually they use it to enhance machinability. So the more sulfur you have in a steel, the easier it is to machine. And the bad thing about sulfur is that it mixes with the iron and turns into iron sulfate, and then you get a whole mess of problems. You can look that up. I'm not going to get in depth with it. I just want to talk the basics of 1095. So you have those elements, or those alloying additions added, some other impurities that aren't probably going to show up, and like I said before, also too, if you have manganese and sulfur, they prevent hot shortness, which is something we can talk about later. I'm not really familiar with that term, so I'd have to look it up. But again, we can talk about it later, or you can look it up, whatever hot shortness is, or I can put it up on the screen and you can fucking read it. So those are the bases of 1095 steel. Obviously there's no chromium in these, and we can tell that by, metal's shiny and inherently shiny. Chromium kind of brings out that luster, but it also helps form a barrier around the steel, and that's what prevents or creates the stainless effect. And 1095 just lacks in it. I don't see an issue with this at all. If you're taking care of your knives, you don't need a fucking stainless steel. You're going to find out throughout these videos that I fucking hate stainless steel. So, so yeah, that's basically what 1095 is. And then I just wanted to get in real quick about, I wanted to do a video on this knife, but since we're talking about 1095, we can talk about this knife. So 1095 has been used, for years in cutlery and knife making. And again, like I said, the thing that makes it a stainless is, the additions of chromium, or chromium additions, and, other alloying elements. So back in the day, there was the first cutlery company you've never heard of. It's called Robeson Cutlery Company, and they actually started here where I live in Rochester, New York. And these guys helped pioneer a lot of things that a lot of modern slip joint companies use today, and a lot of folder companies use today. To begin with, when they started out, the guy was purchasing actual folders from Germany and then just putting his name on it and then just selling them kind of as a side hustle, like we all do when we get into knife making. It's usually just a side hustle. And so yeah, he did that and then wanted to start his own cutlery company, and then it just took off. And they had over 1,200 different designs. This one included. And around that time is when, things started to pop off, and like people were losing interest in knives. So they had to recruit one of the members of Case Knives. I think Emerson Case was his name. Don't quote me on that. I can post it, I guess. Basically, he came in and he's like, "Yo, guys, fucking, we're buying all of your debt up. We're gonna kind of help you out with the company. It's still gonna be Robeson, but we're gonna run it, basically." And so that's what happened. So he came in. They got rid of a bunch of designs, but then added kitchen cutlery, stainless steel kitchen cutlery to their lineup. And it was already there, but they, embellished on it and got, more designs. So they did that, and there's a few stories involved with that. So one of them is when they started developing this high-end kitchen cutlery, they also developed a process known as cryogenics, or a cryo. And that's when you would austenize the steel, you would quench it, and then you'd either do a snap temper or wait till get it to room temperature and then go right into your cryogenic, whatever solution you're using, whether it be liquid nitrogen or dry ice or something of that nature that gets really, really cold. Liquid nitrogen is around negative 300 degrees. The cryo, I think, is around negative 100 or somewhere around there. So obviously liquid nitrogen is a lot better. So they did that. They did the cryo. They did their heat treats. And guess what happened? They had significant increases in edge retention. And the reason why we know this is because there's a little correspondence between Julia Childs and another either woman or man who's a French chef. And they're talking about, she's like, thank you for this knife you sent me. It's so much easier to sharpen than these Robeson knives. I've had to I can't even sharpen these Robeson knives on the steel. I had to send them all back in, and they have to sharpen them for me. It's such a hassle, and yada, yada, yada. So back then, it was a pain in the ass for them to sharpen all of these hardened, cryoed knives, and they wanted softer steels. Far cry from where we're at today, because everyone's bitching about how soft everything is, and they want a fucking hard knife. So you can't make people happy. It doesn't matter if it's in fucking 1920s or 2020. So 100 years ago, people didn't want, hard knives to cut with. They wanted soft ones because it's easier to sharpen. Now we have diamond sharpeners and all this stuff. We can easily sharpen these steels, whether it be super steel or a high carbon steel such as 1095. Anyway, you get the picture. Another thing they helped develop, other than cryo, was obviously their designs increased. Their kitchen cutlery was a household name. And then they also had, I think, a patent for a self-lubricating bearing. Basically what it was a piece of brass that was kind of like, it looked like a clip, like one of those paper alligator clip things. And it was clipped on the profile of the knife like this way, and you could put oil in it. It would self-lubricate because the brass is softer and all this other shit. It never worked, and it slipped out, so they never really kept them on there very long. But yeah, eventually this company, eventually Emerson Case, worked himself to death, literally had a heart attack and died. And this company started to dwindle. Ontario Knives, which is also a local knife company where I'm from, they bought the Robeson name, they sold it, or they licensed the name out basically, and I think to Queen Cutlery for a while. They made a bunch of pocket ease knives. You can see those around. They're not a true Robeson. They're not made at the Robeson factory like this one right here. But they eventually their downfall just happened to come at not the best time. And it's all because people wanted, quick, easy, disposable things. They didn't want to carry a pocket knife around anymore. And then eventually the name got bought up. They just kind of fucking put it in a filing cabinet and forgot about it. I actually reached out to Ontario Knives and the technology company that owns Ontario Knives, because they're not owned independently. They're owned by, a private party. I reached out to both companies and they didn't fucking have anything to say to me, so fuck them. Fuck Ontario Knives. They can go fuck themselves. I hope they fucking don't become a knife company anymore either. I hope they enter the same fate as Robeson, because they're a bunch of fucking pieces of shit. Not because they didn't answer me, just because they could have been top of their game now and they didn't think forward. And then eventually, Queen Cutlery shut down, and then we have GEC, which I think bought a bunch of their fucking machinery and now makes their knives in Titusville, Pennsylvania. So a little close history of 1095, a little close history of these knives. This knife actually got on eBay for 20 bucks, and it is over 100 years old. I can tell that not by this Tang stamp, but by the place of where it says Robeson, Sure Edge, and then Rochester, New York. I actually have a straight razor as well that is a Sure Edge Robeson. There's another company called, there's a Geneva Knife Co. They turned into Genco and then Pyramid Knives. In the whole buying of the Robeson name, they Ontario also bought, Robeson, and then they also bought the the Genco or Geneva Cutlery Co. and kind of fucking dissolved everything, just like companies do. That's just what companies do. They'll buy out a company just to shut them down so they don't have to compete with them. It's actually cheaper for them to do that. So anyway, yeah, this knife is like 100 years old. I actually finished the scales. I'm gonna pop these scales off and probably do like a black micarta like this at some point, but that's where we're at. I cleaned everything up. It looks great. It's 1095, man. It fucking lasts the test of time. And it gets sharp as shit. There's a video on my Instagram of me whittling hair with this fucking thing. So, but yeah, so that's 1095 in a nutshell, and a little knife history of a knife company that you've never heard of, Robeson Knives. Go check them out on eBay or Etsy. There's a lot of people they have them sitting up there for fairly cheap, and they're very good knives. And if you can find a Robeson knife that is touted as a frozen heat, those are the cryo knives. Those are the knives that are under cryogenic treatment, and they should, sharpen very, very nicely, and they should hold an edge very well because of the extra cryo treatment. I know there's a huge controversy, well, not a huge one, but some controversy with cryo, and does it help, doesn't it help? It does. Just shut the fuck up. So that's that. And if there's any steels you want me to talk about, drop a line. I'll do my best to do my research. Again, Patreon to Knife Steel Nerds, because that dude has way more information than I'll ever have. He's a PhD fucking metallurgy. His dad invented a lot of fucking steels, I'm pretty sure, or had a hand in it anyway. Go check him out. Sign up for his Patreon. $10 an article. It's fucking worth it. And yeah, let me know if there's any steels you want me to talk about. I might get in next time to the tool steels, because those are very, very interesting to me. Not high-speed tool steels, but just normal tool steels, like your O1s, your A2s, and your W1s and all that stuff. So, all right, guys. Thanks for watching, and have a good night. Subscribe. Stay warm. Thank you.